we ready? Good afternoon, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. This is a bittersweet moment for me. It is my last subcommittee markup of the state, and I swore I wasn't going to get emotional. I'll start again. Good afternoon, everyone. The subcommittee will come to order. This is a bittersweet moment for me. It is my last subcommittee markup of the State and Foreign Operations Bill. Contemplating my retirement at the end of this year, I ask you to indulge me in a few reflections. First, the important work of this subcommittee. Since World War II, foreign aid has been a key component of United States foreign policy. The billions we allocate to the State Department, the U.S. Agency for International Development, and other federal agencies tasked with carrying out American interests in promoting freedom and democracy throughout the world account for only roughly 1% of our federal budget. Yet we have made the world better, safer, and healthier while improving the security of generations here at home. We have supported the near eradication of polio and stemmed the scourge of HIV/AIDS. We have increased access to health services so that fewer mothers must walk for hours to get wellness checks for themselves and their babies. We have helped individuals, communities, and countries recover following natural disasters and provided support for vulnerable migrants and those displaced by wars and famines. We have intervened to relieve suffering from atrocities in the Balkans and Darfur. We have advanced equity and opportunity for women so that they, their children, and their communities might prosper. As I have often said, education is the single greatest force multiplier in foreign aid and contributing to many of our other successes. That is why I'm particularly proud of the record levels of U.S. assistance for basic education for more than 80 million children around the world, especially girls, as well as for international family planning. And because of all these and other priorities, we have advocated together our own children and grandchildren are safer. September 11th was the darkest day of my career, as too many of my constituents lost loved ones and some even perished on the sacred ground where the Twin Towers once touched the sky. Similar to the reality we face today with coronavirus, in the wake of that tragedy, our nation reawakened to the stark truth that circumstances and events half a world away can dramatically influence the well-being and security of Americans here at home. It has been my honor to work with all of you. From a common belief in the absolute necessity of effective diplomacy and global engagement, as well as robust development assistance to protect our own national security, even as we address moral imperatives beyond our own borders. Secondly, bipartisanship. This subcommittee has worked collegially in the best interests of the American people during all my nearly 3 decades as a member. And I want to express my particular appreciation for the leader for the leadership of former chairs Hal Rogers, Kay Granger, and Jim Colby, with whom I have enjoyed working. Mr. Rogers, the bill we consider today is stronger for your insights and input on shared bipartisan priorities. And thirdly, a personal note. When I faced the difficult choice of being the ranking member on this subcommittee or the Labor HHS Education Subcommittee, I bucked conventional wisdom in Washington. And it was a difficult choice because as passionately as I feel about the work of Labor H, and despite its many billions more dollars, my heart is in the work of this subcommittee, and I would clearly miss it, as well as my partnership with all of you. But our work is not done yet, so I'd like now to share the highlights of what's in the bill and note that I've worked hard to accommodate most member requests. Given the quick timeline to get this bill to the floor, I request that any amendments be reserved until the bill is considered by the full committee. With a total of $65.87 billion, the House bill rejects the president's, quote, go-it-alone approach to foreign policy and expresses this committee's concerns about the timely obligation and prudent expenditure of resources. To ensure that unexpected events do not trigger the conditioning of aid, thereby leaving intended beneficiaries vulnerable, this bill provides greater distinction between short-term diplomatic and political initiatives and long-term investments in development. It also provides overseas contingency operations, or OCO, under account headings with enduring funds to offer a transparent accounting of the true resources needed to fund United States foreign policy and advance national security interests. The bill includes $47.85 billion in base funding, $8 billion in OCO funding for base requirements that otherwise would not be funded by the president's budget request, and $10.018 billion in coronavirus emergency funding. The need for emergency funding to address COVID-19, which has claimed more than 125,000 American lives and 500,000 people worldwide, cannot be overstated. In fact, the dire expectations for its impact on Americans' health and our economy demand that the administration and the Senate come to the table to consider these urgent funds and the HEROES Act the House passed in May immediately. In addition to addressing immediate COVID-19 needs, the MARC takes a holistic approach to global health and seeks to accelerate the strengthening of health systems in low and middle-income countries to manage health threats and communicable diseases, which we know all too well do not respect borders. To help sustain progress against HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria, the MARC provides $5.93 billion for global HIV/AIDS activities, including $1.56 billion for the Global Fund, and clarifies the U.S. commitment to maintaining our 33% share. It also reverses the president's global gag rule and stops counterproduction restrictions on family planning and health funding, while including $805.5 million for family planning services, of which $55.5 million is for the United Nations Population Fund to ensure that millions of women can access critically needed health care. As this committee seeks to ensure the impact of COVID-19 does not derail development gains over the past several decades, the MARC provides $3.8 billion for development assistance. This includes $975 million to increase access to basic education, of which not less than $150 million shall be spent on girls' education in areas of conflict. It also maintains our commitment to addressing food insecurity, improving water, sanitation services, putting an end to trafficking in persons, and promoting other long-term development objectives that support thriving, healthy communities while strengthening our own national security. This requires addressing unique challenges from bad actors who seek to disrupt our democracy via digital means, to fortifying security capabilities to prevent regional conflicts from generating international crises. To address the harmful policies of the administration that perpetuate the challenges and increase migration to our southern border, this legislation amends prior year appropriations acts to significantly limit the administration's ability to redirect assistance outside of the region. It maintains robust funding for counter-narcotics and law enforcement efforts for our neighbors in Colombia, Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. The MARC includes $68 million to address international organized crime and maintains funding to combat cybercrime. It provides a total of $9 billion for security assistance to key allies and partners, and maintains strong support for programs in Eastern Europe, Jordan, and Tunisia. The bill keeps the commitments of the United States at Camp David in 1979 to promote peace in the Middle East by providing $3.3 billion in aid for Israel's security, as well as assistance for Egypt. Additionally, the MARC prioritizes the security of diplomatic and development staff in the facilities where they work, with $6.071 billion for embassy security, which is $692.2 billion above the President's request. The United States cannot tackle the world's challenges alone. We work best when we work together, and the United States must reclaim its leadership role on the global front, lest the world become susceptible to malign influence from actors like Russia and China, who do not share our democratic values. That is why the MARC reaffirms our support for international allies, multilateral organizations, which extends the impact of our assistance, maximizes taxpayer dollars, and facilitates delivery of aid where it is needed urgently to mitigate human suffering. To support these efforts, the bill includes $7.83 billion in refugee and disaster assistance, including to Latin America, the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The MARC also seeks to restore humanitarian and development assistance to the Palestinians to continue the viability of a two-state solution by providing resources to organizations working in the West Bank and Gaza. I am particularly proud that as a bipartisan priority, the MARC includes $50 million to fund a new partnership for peace in the Middle East that would promote economic development while strengthening engagement between Palestinians and Israelis through people-to-people programs and economic ventures. As we seek to address ongoing and anticipated humanitarian needs, we look to combat a persistent threat that drives migration and conflict that can destabilize regions. That is climate change. The MARC provides funds in this and prior acts to support multilateral efforts to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It also strengthens conservation and environment programs and continues funding for adaptation and renewable energy programs at prior year levels. These points reflect just a few highlights of the bill and report, which I do urge you all to read thoroughly. And before I turn to my ranking member, Mr. Rogers, for his statement, I'd like to express my appreciation to Congresswoman Martha Roby for her service on this subcommittee, as she also plans to leave the Congress at the end of this year, and your dedication to the rights of women in Afghanistan and gender programs like WGDP will live on in this bill. I also want to recognize the wonderful staff who've worked remotely to prepare the bill. I want to thank Susan Adams, the minority clerk, Jamie McCormick of the minority staff, Austin Gage of Ranking Member Rogers' personal staff, as well as my SFOP staff, including Clerk Steve Marquez, Craig Higgins, Erin Kolodziejski, Dean Caloris, Jason Wheelock, Maren Stein, Jean Kwan, and Clelia Alvarado. I also thank Wendy Corson, Kelly Hilton, Dana Acton, and Elizabeth Stanley on my staff, and express my gratitude to past staff members and fellows who supported my work on the subcommittee. Matt Traub, Beth Tritter, Howard Wolfson, Claire Coleman, Jeannie Doyle, Jenny LeRae, Scott Fleming, Mark Isaac, Sharon Levin, Jim Townsend, Chris Bigelow, Lucy Heenan, Ann Vaughn, Talia Dubovy, Liz Leibowitz, Sonali Cordy, Joe Weinstein, Mark Lopez, Megan Oates, Kwaroku, Ralph Falzone, Mark Murray, Nisha Biswal, Michelle Sumalas, and Michael Marek. I almost feel like singing "You Made Me What I Am Today," but there are so many people that we thank if you've been here as long as I am. My heartfelt thanks to all of my past and current staff. This committee's achievements are all yours. So thank you so very much for indulging me. And after Mr. Rogers speaks, I will recognize my full committee ranking member, Ms. Granger, for any comments she would like to make. I will then recognize any member of the subcommittee for short comments on the bill. I didn't leave you much time, I apologize. Mr. Rogers, please proceed.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, for your passionate devotion to this subcommittee's work. It's been a labor of love on your part. You're passionate in your work to help the needy of the world. So congratulations on bringing forward the operations bill for 2021, your final one. I wish the markup process this year were taking place under better circumstances. But despite the challenging operating environment, you and your staff have done a great job getting us to this point. Before I discuss the bill, I want to take a moment to salute our chair as she kicks off her final markup session. Not only this bill, but all of the others. But this one, being the first one that you scheduled, I think shows your dedication to the work that this subcommittee oversees. So thank you especially for your great devotion. Your commitment to this bill and the people it helps all over the world is well known and fully appreciated. To me, this is best demonstrated by the fact that you decided to chair this subcommittee while also serving as the full committee chair. I know the time and effort involved in carrying out the responsibilities that come with leading the full committee. It's not for the faint of heart. Yet you still chose to make time for a busy state foreign operations schedule. Nita, I greatly admire your devotion to this work, as do all of us. We spent decades negotiating any number of issues, traveling to all corners of the globe. I recall the rainforest in Central America. We made 2 trips in one. My first and last.
Smile at that one. I'll never forget that one.
In fact, the work of this subcommittee in overseeing the State Department is of special interest to me. When I first came to Congress in '81, I got on the full committee in '83 and became, shortly thereafter, the ranking member and then later chairman of the subcommittee on state foreign on Commerce, Justice, State at that time. And in overseeing the work of our diplomats overseas and the staffs that they have was a special interest of mine. I recall one of those trips that the subcommittee made in '89 to Eastern Europe and working with our ambassadors and staffs in those countries which were so hard hit during the Cold War. We wound up in Frankfurt on the way home, and the State Department was with us overseeing our trip. We got ready to leave town on the Air Force plane, and they bussed us to the airport with the State Department person with us. And they told us we got a problem with the airplane. We got to work on it. So we waited around there for an hour or an hour and a half. Finally, the State Department guy, worried that the committee that funds the State Department would be uncomfortable, told the Air Force, look, these people, we've got to get this committee back to D.C. And if you can't get this plane fixed in the next 15 minutes, I'm going to put them on a commercial flight at the airport. Well, with about 2 minutes to go, the State Department guy left and made reservations for us at the terminal on a commercial flight, comes back to the bus and says, Air Force, you've got 5 minutes to get this plane fixed, or I'm going to have to take them to the terminal to fly home. So with just a few minutes left, Air Force says, we got it fixed, got the plane fixed. So we all pile on the Air Force plane, and the State Department supervisor goes back to the terminal and cancels our reservations on the commercial flight he had made for us on Pan Am 103. Pan Am 103. And we took off, and the plane, Pan Am 103, flew over Lockerbie just after us, and of course it exploded. I've often thought about that. But it demonstrated that the dangers that our foreign personnel, our personnel in foreign nations, work every day under very dangerous conditions, many of them, and we don't pay enough respect to them for the great work that they do. So thank you in this bill for taking, I think, reasonably good care. There's some things that we need to talk about, but hopefully that will work out. And I'm glad you mentioned Martha Roby, a very important member of this subcommittee that has now decided to go home and work from there. Martha, you've not been on the subcommittee very long, but I've admired your focus on oversight, especially, and your zeal in pursuing that, among other things. The American taxpayer can be proud of your relentless efforts to demand results and accountability for every dollar spent on their behalf. So thank you for your great service to your country and to work with us. Turning back to the matter at hand, Madam Chair, this year's bill includes, as you said, $47.85 billion in base funding, $8 billion in overseas contingency operations for a total of $55.85 in non-emergency discretionary funding. That's an increase of nearly $1.2 billion over the previous fiscal year. It also includes $10 billion in emergency funding for coronavirus response. Within the total, the bill includes funding for many key priorities that are critical to our national security and that we can all support. I thank the chair for including $3.3 billion in foreign military financing for our great ally Israel and for your steadfast support for their security. I'm also pleased that the bill maintains funding at the current level for embassy security. The attacks on our embassy in Baghdad this year were a stark reminder of how we must do everything we can to support the safety of our Foreign Service officers working abroad. In addition, I appreciate the chair continuing funding to combat the flow of drugs into our country and to tackle transnational crime overseas. These efforts go hand in hand with the work we do here at home in the relentless fight against drug abuse and addiction. I want to thank you, Madam Chair, for maintaining funding for the Development Finance Corporation for its second year of investments. I understand the authorizing committees continue to work on a solution to how equity financing is scored. I hope that when the time comes, we can work together to address this issue so that the DFC can fulfill its mandate and give developing nations a better alternative to predatory Chinese financing. These are a few examples of investments supported in this bill by both sides. That's why I'm once again disappointed to the partisan policy writers included that are sure to end any bipartisan support. The sweeping measures included in the bill to overturn the President's policy of protecting life and global health guarantee that the bill has no hope of becoming law unless these provisions are removed. The bill also includes controversial funding and language on climate issues, the United Nations, and a range of other problematic areas. Finally, I remain concerned about unchecked spending, especially at this time of soaring deficits and debt. We need to carefully consider any increase in spending and the long-term consequences of such actions. Before I close, Madam Chair, I want to also thank the staff. We can't do this ourselves. We have to have good help, and you've got it. Both sides of the aisle, hard work, smart work. Susan Adams and Jamie McCormick from the minority staff, Jake Johnson, Austin Gage from my personal office, and from the majority staff. I want to especially thank Steve Marcase and his team. They've all been a great help, and their efforts are greatly appreciated. They've done us good. So, Madam Chair, thank you very much for your service again. I yield back.
Thank you. Now I'd like to turn to my friend and full committee ranking member, Ms. Granger, for any comments she may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair, so much. Before I begin my remarks about the State Foreign Operations Bill, I want to take a moment to recognize you, Mrs. Lowy, my friend, as you begin what I disagree with, and I don't look like you're leaving, but you're going to do it. I assume you've not changed your mind. Nita and I took turns as chair and ranking member of the subcommittee, and I felt like we accomplished some really good things. We had policy disagreements, but we had an agreement that we could disagree without being disagreeable, and that made it all work, and it was very important. At the beginning, people questioned, well, the Jewish grandmother from New York and the Methodist grandmother from Texas could work together. Several years later, we were named to InStyle magazine's 50 Badass Women. I had to explain to my friend Nita that in Texas that was a great, very important high praise, but it was sort of funny. We worked together on critical issues in global health and combating HIV, AIDS, and malaria, and supporting life-saving maternal and child health. We both recognized the importance of education for women and girls, and we stood firm in our support. Martha Roby does the same thing, but no one can say they've done it more to advance this cause than you have. No one. Your legacy will be a generation of educated girls that will have the power to shape their future and our future, and you did that. It would not have been possible without your tireless efforts and insistence that funding for basic education was a priority regardless of who was in the White House. For Anita, it was all about more than just the money. She pressed to make sure our investments delivered results. One day when we get back to conducting tours to overseas programs, which is so important to really see what we can do, everybody should be sure to visit a school or meet with women in leadership roles. And chances are they were touched in some way by your dedication, Nita. Turning to the State Foreign Operations Bill before us today, during this unbelievable time of instability around the world, it's important to remember that our investments abroad can make us more secure at home. The fiscal year 2021 bill funds many programs that will do exactly that. It provides $3.3 billion for Israel, demonstrating our unwavering support for the security of our great ally and our partnership, and you've always understood that it is a very special relationship. It protects funding for embassy security and counterterrorism programs. It includes funds to advance global health, promote democracy, and address human trafficking. Unfortunately, while there are areas where we agree, I have some serious concerns about partisan riders that have been inserted and the negative impact they could have. The bill includes permanent changes in law that would overturn the current Mexico City policy, making it legal, for goodness, I'm sorry. I thought I turned that off. Making it legal for grantees to receive federal funding even if they perform abortions. This is controversial, and I hope we can reverse that as the bill moves forward. I'm also disappointed to see that policies in the bill aimed at enhancing transparency and accountability at the United Nations were removed. And finally, I'm concerned about the level of spending in this bill and others that we will mark up over the next few days. We had a budget agreement less than a year ago where we settled on spending caps, and now it's not the time to reverse course without buy-in from members on both sides. To close, I want to thank Ranking Member Rogers, the former chairman of the full committee, for his leadership. I want to thank my staff, Susan Adams and Jamie McCormick, as well as Steve Marcase, the majority clerk, and all of Mrs. Lowy's staff. They've always been helpful. They've always worked together. Madam Chairman, before I close, I want to wish you a belated happy birthday. It was yesterday. And I hope you had a great birthday.
I did, thank you.
Enjoy it. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. At this point, I'd like to open the floor to any member who would like to be recognized for short comments. Ms. Lee.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and I too want to wish you a very, very, very happy birthday. And just say to you, Madam Chair, I'll reserve my comments on the bill for our full committee markup. But let me just say thank you so much for your leadership. I know, like every member of this subcommittee, we're going to miss you tremendously. It's a very powerful tool for America to contribute to a safer, more humane, and peaceful world. And your mark and the framework upon which you have led this committee really does give us a powerful example of how we can accomplish this work. And let me just mention the International AIDS Conference, which is starting today, and it's virtual this year, Madam Chair, and it was going to be in Oakland and San Francisco, which was a major, major development because we have not had an International AIDS Conference for many, many years in the Bay Area. And so I bring you greetings from people from around the world and a real, I would say, debt of gratitude which everyone owes you as it relates to the funding for PEPFAR and the Global Fund. And I think today is such a glorious day because we've saved so many lives, but we can achieve an AIDS-free generation by 2030. The conference, the title is Resilience, and you have been totally resilient and very persistent in your work to make sure that this remain bipartisan, the funding levels, and also that we move forward in achieving a AIDS-free generation. So I just want to thank you so much also finally for your real commitment to the continent of Africa and the Caribbean region, because for so long, the continent of Africa, African countries, and the Caribbean have really been neglected in our funding priorities and in our policies, but you have helped to really bring these unrepresented continents and countries to the forefront in this committee, so I'm deeply grateful to you for that. Thanks to the staff, they've been phenomenal in helping make sure all of our priorities were included, and we know that never would have happened had it not been for your leadership. And it's just been a joy to serve in this committee and to be with you on several very intense CODELs as we looked at so many issues. Ghana, wheelchairs for children. We've been on so many humanitarian and fact-finding visits, and it's been really a joy to travel with you. Congresswoman Roby, let me just thank you. We're going to miss you. I know I'll see you in Alabama. I want to just say to you how, in many ways, this is a time for you to be home, given all of the issues of racial justice. And it's been a pleasure to work with you on this committee, but also with the Faith and Politics Institute in your district in Alabama each and every year. And I see your commitment to justice and to equity, and I know that your voice and your work at this point in time at home is going to be extremely important. So we're going to miss you, but thank you for your leadership. Thank you again, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And at this point, I'd like to open the floor to any member who would like to say a few words, short comments about the bill. Raise your hand. I'll call on those members wishing to be recognized.
Madam Chair.
Of course, my good friend.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the recognition, and happy belated birthday as well. If I could admit something to you, I really don't want to be here. This is the 24th anniversary of my wife's and I's wedding day. Ooh. But if I can't be with her, it is a privilege to spend it with you. So.
My goodness.
You know Celeste.
I'm so moved by that.
You and Steve have been so kind to me and Celeste through the years as we've engaged in a variety of things.
Good times.
Yes, we have.
Meaningful times.
Meaningful, absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your leadership. I'm deeply impressed by several of your qualities, if I could put it that way. Your graciousness, your tenacity in pursuing what you believe, and at the same time, an openness to dialogue on varied perspectives. You've been very generous to me in that regard, the highlight of which was a phone call I received from you the other day, in which you talked about this work on the Middle East Partnership for Peace and your willingness to put it in the bill. The architects of peace do extraordinary work, but sometimes we expect that to sort of just trickle down and find its way to the ground. It's a hard lift, particularly in this region, and your willingness to engage in these harder questions. And as you reflected openly the other day with the King of Jordan on that very important Zoom call we had, that this is one of the regrets, that after decades and decades of tireless service to the ideals of diplomacy and development, which you've helped lead, that this just doesn't seem to be moving at the moment. So I really appreciate your willingness to come around the second curve. Now, that's a an expression that we had in track when I ran it in high school. There was an event where you ran one lap, and when you come around the second curve, there's not a lot of oxygen left. But not with you. You're clearly sprinting to the finish here, to the end, and I'm grateful for that. So I wanted to thank you publicly again for the deep depth of friendship and kindness that you've shown me, and wish you all the best in the future.
And I want to thank you particularly because we'll continue to work together on the Partnership for Peace, and I know of your commitment to that as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Pry.
Madam Chair, I have been listening carefully to these tributes and seconding all of them. So I associate myself with, as we say, with the tributes from both sides of the aisle, and want to add my thanks for years of productively working together on things we care about and know are important. And of course, your devotion to this bill is evident, and this product you've put before us today in so many ways bears out your commitment and the commitment that you enable us all to act on. I especially appreciate the support for governance work, democracy promotion in some of the most difficult, struggling, yet valiant countries in the world, countries we have great admiration for, and yet countries that struggle. And that's with whom we engage on the House Democracy Partnership, colleague to colleague, staff to staff. And once again, you're supporting that House Democracy Partnership work in this bill. You're supporting democracy funding in general, and you're helping us pay attention to specific countries that are in a critical position, and some were inexplicably left out of the president's budget, but they're not left out of this bill. Tunisia, Ukraine, Georgia, Lebanon, Liberia, Kenya, the list goes on of countries that are struggling, and countries whose fate we have a profound interest in terms of our values, but also in terms of our global interests. So we will have time to discuss some of the details of this bill in full committee, but I'm happy to add my tribute today to the work you've done and to the product. Also, Martha Roby, thank you for your work. Because of HDP, I particularly know of the work you and Susan Davis have done in Afghanistan with women politicians, but especially women parliamentarians, which are a tough and admirable group if you ever saw one. So we'll miss you, but we'll look forward to your continuing work, as my colleague Barbara has said. So, Nita, congratulations, and
Thank you.
Godspeed.
Thank you. I was thinking of you with all the stories, not such good stories, coming here from Afghanistan and the loss of life. But if you'd like to say a few words, we will. I can't say everyone will miss you. I will miss you from afar.
Well, you're mighty kind. I had no intention of speaking, but I really, more than anything, Madam Chair and ranking member leaders, all of you have been so, and to all the members of this committee, I count it one of my greatest joys to have had the privilege and opportunity to serve alongside you here in the House of Representatives. And I appreciate your leadership. I don't know why it took me more than a second to want to be on the Appropriations Committee. I just wish I might have done it a little sooner. But the 6 years now almost that I've had to serve alongside you as an appropriator have been extraordinarily rewarding. I appreciate the bipartisan efforts that take place on this committee, the camaraderie, everything that comes alongside it. And so I just want to thank you for your leadership, and to all of my colleagues, thank you for being my friend and my colleague over all of these years. And I will miss each of you dearly, but I do look forward to the whatever's next. And I hope that we will get to continue to work with each other in different areas. But just thank you for your kind words. It means a lot to me. And again, I didn't expect this at all, but thank you, and look forward to continuing to work through this year's appropriations process. So thank you all for your leadership.
Thank you. Ms. Torres, of course.
Madam Chair, I think we could refer to as Roby the Riveter. Roby the Riveter.
Ms.
Well,
Torres.
Thank you, Chairman Lowy, and also Ranking Member Rogers. I want to thank you both and your staff for your work on another strong bill. I would also like to recognize the committee's clerk, Steve Marquise, along with staff Craig Higgins and Marin Stein, for working directly with my office on this very important bill and the provisions related to the region that I have focused on since coming to Congress in Central America. I'm very proud to support this bill. The global spread of COVID-19 from one country to another has shown that, again, we live in an interconnected world. This bill makes urgent global investments in programs like global health assistance, investments that lead directly back to the security and safety of Americans right here at home. I'm also thankful for the inclusion of provisions focused on tackling corruption and supporting the rule of law in the Northern Triangle. Public corruption in Guatemala, Honduras, and El Salvador has led to high rates of violence and poverty, forcing families to flee and migrate to our southern border. Working towards stability and good governance with our neighbors is the necessary part of any solution to the migration crisis that we have seen in recent years. Chairwoman Lowy, before I end, I want to say thank you. I am truly grateful for the opportunity to have served under your Appropriations Committee chairmanship and SFOB's chair. Our country and the international community as a whole are much safer and more prosperous because of your commitment to foreign assistance and diplomacy. The committee will miss your leadership, but you are leaving behind a legislative legacy that will continue to strengthen American leadership abroad. And to my friend Martha Roby, it's been great knowing you. I will, greatly miss you also in that Alabama slang. Thank you for, being such a great part of this committee again, and I yield back.
If there are no more members who would like to be recognized, the bill is open for amendment. Being that there are no amendments, I recognize Ms. Lee for a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move that the bill be favorably reported to the full committee.
The question is on agreeing to the motion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it. The motion is agreed to. If there is no further business, I ask unanimous consent that staff be allowed to make technical and conforming changes to the bill and report. Thank you all. One final note, please leave the bill and report on the table for subcommittee staff to collect. The subcommittee stands adjourned, and I thank you all for your participation.
One left here, huh?